Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. All right, I think we're pretty good here. We're going to go ahead and get started. Um, again, thank you for giving us a little bit of your time today, but I think it's going to be worth your while. I'm really excited about this session. I've been excited about this session since May when I first met Corey at the ACPE event, which is the Pacific Northwest chapter of COSIN. I'll tell you more about that in a bit here. Um, but it started with some introductions. So I'm Jarrett Benavidez. I am Senior Vice President of Lumu North America. I am responsible for all of the operations, really everything customer facing for our customers in North America. I looked through the list of those of you who have registered. I think a lot of you already know us, but just for anybody who's new out there, Lumu is a cybersecurity platform that automates cybersecurity processes for the K through 12 space. So monitoring, detection, analysis and decision making, responses, blocking of attacks, and then reporting on those attacks. Our software does all of that for our customers with little or no human intervention in most cases. We're really focused on the K through 12 market. I've been at the company now for almost 3 years. When I started, we were just at a couple school districts in a couple states. We're now in 33 states in the K through 12 space. Really excited about how this has gone. And through this experience, I've gotten to know people like Corey and organizations like WSIPC that we're really excited to be partnering with in this. So, um, about our co-host here, Corey, and she'll say something about herself when she gets started here. Corey is the Director of Communications, Outreach, and Engagement at WSIPC. WSIPC is the Washington School Information Processing Cooperative. It is a not-for-profit cooperative that provides products, tools, services to over 300 school districts and ESDs in the state of Washington and neighboring areas, which represents more than 1 million students. So it's a really important and influential organization out west. Again, we're excited to be here today. So again, I met Corey at the ACPE event. This was my second year attending. That event is one of my favorite events for many, many reasons. One, it is in like the most beautiful setting you've ever seen out in the mountains out there. It's a really nice place to go and be serious about work, but also to unwind. It's a very rigid schedule. They've got us going, I think, from 7 a.m. until midnight in most cases on most days. A combination of all the educational stuff during the day and networking opportunities with our peers. Um, and then also a lot of booth time and socializing time in the evening. It's tough on the body, but it's really, really great event, worthwhile. I love going to that event. And so one of the things I love about it is there's a lot of options for different sessions, what's most relevant to each person that's going to be there. And Corey's session was one that stood out to me on the list of sessions to attend, and I luckily did attend it. So a lot of that track is very technical, cybersecurity, topics that we're familiar with and always want to be learning more and more about. But Corey's was really different. This is something that I see as a huge need. It's honestly, it's a huge need in our space. It's a tool that technical directors need, but every single human being on the planet really needs to understand this and could use practice in this. And the topic is what we're going to talk about today, and it's how to get influential people behind your ideas to get your ideas implemented or get budget approval. Like, how do you work with those in your ecosystem to get the things done that you need to get done? So, Corey is a communications expert. She's got a really interesting framework that she's going to present to you about this. I'm going to turn it over to her to walk through the framework, and then after that, Corey and I are going to have a conversation about some of the things that she brought up. I've got some questions for her that I want to ask here. I've been in the fortunate position to have had multiple conversations with Corey about this now, and I've learned a ton. So there are some things I'm going to ask that I've kind of picked up for myself. And then we have time for some audience questions as well. So if you want to ask questions, please put them in the chat. We will do our best to get them to them today. And if we don't, we will follow up with you with some answers. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Corey.
Thank you so much, Jarrett. I'm super excited to be here today, and I'm going to be sharing my screen for you. Pop in the chat if you have any issues hearing or seeing anything, and I'll do what I can to fix it. But I really am excited to be here today to have this conversation with you about communication and communicating with the leaders in your ecosystem. So, first, I want to ask if you've heard this phrase in the last 6 months. Anybody? Right? No one tells us anything. So I want you to think about that and now keep your hand up and be honest if you are the person who sent the thing that they claim no one told them. Right? It's remarkable to me. You and your teams, they communicate consequential things for a living. You explain risk all the time. You translate requirements. You ask people to change some really, really bad online habits. And you sometimes ask them to change those habits, like right up until the day they get hacked and they call you to save them. Right? So, why do people still say that nobody told them anything? Well, usually it's not because there was no communication happening. The email we know was sent, the meeting happened. The instructions, we know we posted them because we have the receipts, right? But what people generally mean when they say no one told us anything, it means to them that they heard about it after the direction was already set and they didn't understand why they were needing to do the thing. They didn't have a chance to tell you what might be missing. And now they're expected to explain this thing or make it work for everyone else. People do not measure communication by whether it was sent. Generally, they're measuring communication by whether it arrived in time to help them take an action. And I saw the consequences of that distinction almost immediately after I joined WSIPC. So I'm going to share a little story with you. One of the first communications projects I worked on involved challenges with implementing multi-factor authentication with our school districts, right? We all know and love having to deal with implementing this with our constituents. There's nothing more humbling to me than trying to move 300 school districts toward a change that they didn't expect and that they didn't all want. So that was a challenge. We had communicated this requirement more than once. We had provided instructions. But the week I started, that was SIPC, the first week, like I didn't even know where the bathrooms were. It was about 8 months after the first introductions and instructions had landed in everyone's inboxes. And we learned that fewer than half of our school districts had implemented it, right? So, from the technology side, I was seeing a lot of resistance, and it was frustrating to our teams as all get out. They were like, we told them what they needed to do and why. Why, pray tell, are we negotiating about whether data needs to be secure? Right? It seems like kind of a no duh statement. But the thing I want to be clear about here is that 50% compliance after 8 months, it doesn't mean that 50% of the people who needed to implement this for their districts didn't care, right? It means that 50% of the people weren't getting what they needed to move forward with the implementation. So we went back, and when we started to look at where the confusion began, we realized we weren't looking at a resistance problem at all. We were looking at more of a communications problem. Some districts were confused about which implementation method to use, and with good reasons. Different communications had gone out from different sources with different guidance. A stakeholder could follow every instruction to the letter that they received and still end up out of compliance. So, for example, there was a message in a really long email thread that I was looped into, and it came from a district finance director. He had done everything we asked exactly when we asked him to. He had implemented MFA, he had communicated with his employees, he had worked with his unions, God bless him, and he had put his own credibility behind this requirement. Then this same guy attended a regional meeting and learned that the authentication he had just implemented was going to be depreciated. So now he had to go back and explain why the thing he had just asked everyone to do was changing again. His question to us was, Is the goalpost going to move right after we communicate and implement, just like in this current situation? Like, ouch, that was very painful to hear. But the question gave us a very important clue. Our most compliant district leader, the person who had done everything we asked, now had the strongest reason to hesitate the next time we had a request. He wasn't resisting MFA. He had implemented it. He was telling us that he hadn't received the right communication from a trusted source. What parts of the change were still open for interpretation? What wasn't settled yet? What didn't we know yet as the organization asking for compliance? What choices did districts still have to make? And what consequences would those choices carry? Now, throughout this situation, we were just discovering these questions, but we were already implementing it. And that's when real people were already experiencing this change. Now, in software development, we would have recognized this problem right away. We were testing in production. So here's the core idea of the framework. Looks familiar, right? So those of you who may not know, most of you do, this is the DevOps model. On the left, there's software and it's being planned and written and built. And on the right, it's being deployed and operated, monitored, being improved. And that point is in the middle is pretty much the release to production. It's the moment that real users begin experiencing the things that were built. That's a very expensive time to discover that something doesn't work, right? Shift left testing moves those quality checks earlier, closer to where the code's being written, not closer to where it ships. As we all know, problems and bugs are generally easier and less expensive to address while a product is still taking shape. But testing doesn't move to the beginning and then just stop, right? We don't test once on a Tuesday, declare quality achieved, and hope for the best. Testing continues throughout the entire DevOps cycle. Monitoring and operations produces new information. That information travels back to development, and then the next iteration is an improved version. So shift left testing, it's not a one-time action. It's a continuous practice. Starting earlier allows quality to become part of every stage that follows. So as I think about it, it occurred to me that communications has a production release too. And for communication, that release point is what I call the announcement threshold. It's the moment a change becomes official, right? So the compliance email goes out, the presentation is delivered, or people are told what they're now expected to do. Shifting left here means starting to communicate before then, a lot like software, but here it's when relationships and trust are still a whole lot less expensive to fix. Everything to the left of the threshold, I call a change in formation. So it's a problem or an initiative that's still being defined. Requirements and constraints are still emerging, decisions are being considered, and the implementation experience is still taking shape. Everything to the right of the announcement threshold is called a change in motion. It's exactly what it sounds like. People are implementing this change. They're adopting it, they're explaining it, they're supporting it, they're responding to it, and they're also living with its consequences. Now, here the consistency still applies. We communicate throughout the life of a change. This is not just a one and done. So the goal with shift left communication is to begin the conversation while a change is still being formed, not waiting until approval time to introduce it to the people whose understanding or decisions or support will be needed as you move forward. So it's a simple concept, right? Shifting left is really just the process of taking a step that's part of whatever value stream you're focusing on and moving it up the timeline. But just like testing, communication does not move to the beginning and stop. I'm not talking about one kickoff meeting followed by 6 months of silence. Your communication, like we said before, has to continue. It continues through the planning stages, through decision making, at that announcement point, and even continues during implementation and adoption. The format of your communicating might change, the urgency might change, And the people who are involved in the conversation might change, but the thread will remain continuous. So that's the idea. In a nutshell, start the conversation earlier than feels necessary, at kickoff, during design, at the decision point, and keep it going after implementation. And now what that creates for you is this ongoing context, right? So instead of asking a leader to understand an entire issue in one meeting, they're encountering it over time. They're hearing the problem first. Then they see some thinking develop. They have opportunities to ask questions, understand the trade-offs, and see what's changing. So when you eventually ask for a decision or for budget approval, you're not introducing the issue for the very first time. So for example, if your superintendent or your finance leader hears about a cyber upgrade, when you put a purchase request in front of them, if that's the first time they're hearing about it, you're asking that one conversation to do an enormous amount of work. So my recommendation is to just shift some of that work left. So then when you do submit your purchase request, the conversation is just about that decision, not about introducing the problem, because you've already done that, not about explaining why it matters, because you've already had that conversation. And you're not asking for approval during those times. You're not asking for all of these things to happen all at once. So if we're communicating starting on the left, the next question is, what do we need to understand while that change is still taking shape? And that begins with the people that we are communicating with. Starting earlier also means thinking more carefully about who is actually in the conversation with you. Because when you're asking a leader to support any kind of initiative, you might think you are just communicating with that one person. But even if they are the only box on the Zoom screen, they are not coming into that conversation alone. They are bringing all of their audiences with them. Your superintendent is thinking about the board, the cabinet, their principals, the teachers, the unions, their students, in the families, in the community. A finance director is thinking about cost. They're also thinking about employees, payroll deadlines, labor agreements, and whether they can credibly explain another operational change. So if we get back to that cyber upgrade example, if you're sitting across from someone asking for budget for a new tool, you're thinking something like, hey, I've identified a real security gap, right? And I know how to fix it. I can help you. And that's amazing. But the person you're talking to is also thinking, okay, so I know what this costs now, but what is it going to cost next year? What else might I not be able to fund if we fund this, no matter how important it is? How do I explain what this is and justify a new expense to my board? What will implementation require from our people? And what happens if I say no to this request? Now, none of that means that the person you're talking to disagrees with the security need. It just means that they are responsible for more than the technology. And the earlier we understand their downstream audiences, the stronger your initial conversation becomes. You can surface consequences, you can start anticipating support needs, and you can recognize where the people carrying the change might need some voice in how that change actually happens. Now, you might be asking one person for a decision, but you're also asking them to carry that decision to everyone who comes next. So, shift left tells us to begin the conversation earlier. But simply holding that same announcement meeting 3 months earlier is not really going to solve very much. We need to move the right conversations earlier. People need a lot of clarity before they can really get behind a change. They need to know about what's genuinely fixed. They need to have an honest understanding about what remains open and an opportunity to surface how the change will affect them. And that's the work of this little diagnostic right here. Fixed means the things that genuinely cannot change. Think about what those might be. They're like legal requirements, maybe a security standard, a specific deadline, a budget constraint, or a decision that we know has already been made and is not being walked back. In our example, the requirement to implement MFA was a fixed thing, right? Cyber is not optional. The security need itself was not up for a vote here. So when something's fixed, say so and say it very clearly. You do not ever need to pretend that every decision is open for discussion. In fact, inviting people to weigh in on something that they can't actually influence is a pretty quick way to damage trust. So you don't need to do that. But you do need to be open and understand the parts of the change that aren't fully settled yet. Sometimes people can meaningfully shape those things, not the things that are fixed. Sometimes we have things during a change that are still evolving because we don't have the final answer yet. But either way, you have to be open and honest about those things. And those things include timing, sequencing, implementation methods, right? Training, support. Sometimes there are legitimate exceptions that need to be surfaced. And sometimes there are thoughts about how future changes are going to be handled. It's also important when you're talking about what's open to be honest about the degree of certainty as much as you can. If something's still being decided, say that. If people can influence a decision, tell them how. And if things might change as you're learning more, you have to share that too. So in our MFA rollout, obviously the requirement was a fixed thing. The implementation path, though, that was not as settled. Districts had been given several implementation options that were valid at the time, and some people acted on it. But later we learned that one of them was going to be depreciated. And that's exactly where being clear about what's open still matters. If something's still evolving, people need to know that before they build their plans around it. And if the answer changes later, and sometimes it does, continuous communication builds trust. And at that point, it means telling them as soon as we know and not letting them discover it unexpectedly at a regional meeting. Then we have affected. And this is where understanding those downstream audiences becomes essential. Who's going to implement the change? Whose work will be different because of it? And who's taking on additional risk or effort or responsibility? With our MFA situation, we had to think about the users, the managers, the help desk staff, labor partners, even people using personal devices. We also had to consider our early adopters who had already put their credibility behind the change. These are all people that carry the consequences, even if implementation doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal. So used together, these three questions keep us from treating everything as negotiable when it's not, and also helps us from treating nothing as negotiable when meaningful choices actually still do exist. So the long and short of it is that people don't need control over every decision, but they do need an honest understanding of what's fixed, a meaningful voice in what is still open, and enough awareness and runway to respond to everything with some agency. The framework itself is simple, but the practice is really paying attention early enough to use it. So here's the whole idea in 3 bullet points. First, before your next announcement, just ask yourself, did this conversation begin while the change was still taking shape? Have we considered not just the person we're asking to support a decision, but the people that they have to carry with them? And have we been honest about what's fixed, what remains open, and who will be ultimately affected by the change? You don't have to make every decision collaborative, and you don't have to communicate every last detail before you know it. But you do, I recommend, have to stop treating the announcement as the beginning of the conversation. You want to move the right conversations left and keep them going. When people have context, when they understand the constraints, and when they've had a meaningful opportunity to surface what you might not see from the technology side, you're not just asking them to approve something or implement something. You're giving them the agency, giving them what they need to help carry it. And that is how you'll get to move from technology to trust. Now, I know we're about to move into a conversation. There is a ton more that we can unpack here. We can spend an entire session on any one of these ideas. But today, I really just wanted to give you an overview of the framework, share the idea, and give you a simple way to start using it. I don't think you need to redesign your entire communication process today. Just notice where your conversations are beginning, who needs to be a part of those conversations, and the things that have room to still be shaped. I'm looking forward to hearing what that brings up for you. And Jarrett, I'm so excited to start the conversation. Thanks for letting me share my framework with you.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm happy to see it. I don't even know if you noticed. I'm still taking notes. This is probably like the sixth time I've seen it, but I'm still like you're still generating thoughts and ideas and things that are of value to me. And I was just reflecting again on the first time that I talked to you, again back to my history of meeting you at ACPE. So for everyone else, I approached Corey right after her presentation and said, this is something I see my ecosystem struggling with all the time. And I think it's something that our potential customers, Lumu's customers, would really benefit from is because they, for example, they see our test technology, they know it's going to add value, but then they have to go get somebody's approval for it, and that person has to go get approval for it. Um, but something Corey mentioned in that first conversation too was like, yes, it's valuable, but it's also valuable outside of what we do. So right now, our audience is IT professionals, and we're talking about cybersecurity when you're talking with Lumu, but it is really valuable in every facet of your life. Like think about like there's change in your marriage or your family or things. And there's something about this topic of change. Like what is it about change that is so scary to people, that is so hard? And I've had months to kind of churn on this now too. I think there's a real human element to this, right? As and even empathy and I'm thinking like, even am I a hypocrite? Because I think somebody approaches me, there's a million things I'd like to change. Let's talk about work. Let's just say at my company, there's certain ways that we work. I'm hoping to implement change to improve processes and procedures and that sort of thing. But when someone comes to me with something that's going to change the way I work, that helps them, then I'm all like resistant to it. I have this fear. So it's like, well, I want to make some changes to make my operation better. Other people are bringing me the same kind of stuff. And even within my team, like two different organizations that roll up to me, one says, hey, we can do better over here on, say, for example, our testing processes and procedures with our customers. And then, but how is that going to impact the salespeople? And so even within my team, there's the organizations are resistant to each other. So like, what is it about change and humans and work that's so scary to people?
It's so interesting that you bring up the human aspect of it. It just my folks are visiting right now. I'm in Washington State. They live in Florida and they're visiting. You got me thinking, if the first time my husband learned that my parents were coming to stay with us for a few weeks was the day they were arriving, I don't think that would land very well in my household.
Good example.
They get along great. We have great visits, but change is not so much the change itself, it's the surprise about the change that becomes very complicated for people. I see it all the time. What do you mean? What do you mean this is happening now? What do you mean we have to all of a sudden tell our teachers to carry a little token around with them in addition to their other device in order to manage MFA? How are we going to tell them that? You can't get people to advocate or to at least understand and implement a change by telling them what the change is and saying, start now. Surprise is usually a major factor. Fear is another one, right? New things can be scary. Talking about certain things can be scary. Budget conversations are very difficult for people. So those kinds of changes tend to stir up a lot of emotion. I think that it's more the surprise and the fear, more so than what exactly is changing.
Yeah, and that lines up for me in what I just like in your slides just now too, or in your presentation there, that just going to someone with like, this is what it's going to cost. This is why we need it, and this is what's going to cost. Like first, like start earlier, talk about the problem you're going to solve, talk about the value that what you're suggesting is to create, and just don't arrive there with like this is how much you're going to have to pay to do it. Is like build your case, build your story before you get there with that shocking piece.
Yep.
The more shocking piece. Okay. And by the way, I've been using this too, so I hope my CEO is not listening right now because I'm using these tricks on him. But so we're really we're focused on developing some of our younger employees, like our more junior folks, and how do we invest in them to create a real career path. And one of the things we need to do, or that we want to do, is to get some outside training. So have third party training, professional training come in and develop them. And that stuff is expensive. But I started really working on this after we met, and I've been using this. So I started with like, here's the value. This is we want to keep these people. These are good people. So that means, but they have a lot of options. They're talented. So how are we going to keep them? We need to develop them. We need to have a career path. We need to give them awards along the way. Like you earned this training, which is going to be valuable to you and your brand. And then you earned this special project. Once you're done with that training, you get to do this thing. So I've been like building the case like this, the value, the process. And now we're in, like I've done the research on what kind of course we might want to get for them. And I know have numbers. So now they already know the numbers are coming. And
Mhm.
so but they're actually waiting for the numbers. Like, what is this going to cost us that you're talking about? So I've been using this and it's going pretty smoothly. Compared to the way I might have done in the past, I might have just said, we need to keep these people. Here's the class I want to do, and here's how much it's going to cost. Like that's might be how I've done it in the past.
I think something you said just struck me, and it's he doesn't know I'm using this trick, right? The CEO doesn't know. And I come from an advertising and marketing background, and I do understand the power of persuasion and the power of a good pitch and good spin on PR to really get people to see things the way you want them to see them. I also think that communication is about establishing relationships. And from the conversations you and I have had, you have good relationships with your leadership, right? I mean, you're part of the leadership team. You have a great relationship with your CEO. And with my work, when I need to communicate something, it doesn't have to be so polished, right? I can just go to my CEO and say, I want to start a conversation with you about professional development. I'm thinking a little bit about my employees and how I want to develop them and how we can better engage them and keep them and retain them for years and keep them on this great career path, right? So if you just say, I'm starting this conversation with you now because I'm interested in looking into some numbers here and I don't want you to be surprised when I send you all of this information. So what would work for you? If I'm interested in doing this, if you think it is also a good idea, then let's think about when the next conversation is and what you would need to know in order to comfortably accept a proposal about how much this would cost, right? Like that. Just being open about it and saying, I want to make sure I'm communicating with you in a way that makes sense to you. There might be things that are going on in his world that you're just not aware of, right? We don't always have access to our boss's calendars, so we just don't know the conversations they're having.
So building on that topic and something I'm kind of pulling back from something that you shared in your presentation then too is in a perfect world, that first conversation any of us are having about with someone up the food chain from us, right? Someone that we need to go to get approval for something that we want, or at least start that process of getting approval. Hopefully that's a good relationship and we can start that the way you just said, like, hey, I'd like to have a conversation with you or bounce an idea off you, or this is let's talk about this. This is something I think we might want to look at, but can I start like let's start this dialogue. It's great if your first conversation can be like that, and I think it makes sense to do that. Um, and I have the luxury, maybe it's not always a luxury, reporting directly to the CEO. I'm one hop away from getting what I need, right? I have to really get like mostly one person on board. Well, I have CFO too, but get those guys like on board with what my requests. Um, a lot of times when other folks are asking for stuff, or even me in different facets of my life, there's multiple levels of approval that need to happen. and you talked about this, you talked about knowing your audience, which would be that first thing, like the relationship that you have with the person you're going to go to first, but then knowing their audience, like where are they going to go? Like, so how does that look different? How does that factor into this whole topic? And how do you, I mean, is there a responsibility of the person with the idea? Like, so the person with the need that wants to get it approved, like, how do they enable that first person they're going to be successful to talk to the person that they need to talk to?
It's an interesting question. It's That's a little more complicated because different organizations are structured differently and they handle those kinds of intake needs differently, right? If you're in a typical hierarchy, then you would go to your manager first. Don't circumvent somebody because you think your idea takes precedence over other ideas because you don't know what else is coming down the pipeline, right? So I always recommend that people go to their direct supervisor. Who would you need to advocate for this, right? And you need to be able to have that same conversation with them and get them to be your champion. So that's where it starts. But remembering what's that person's relationship with the people they have to go talk to? What's their relationship with the rest of your team if you have other members there, or if they have a lateral relationship or communication they have to work through. Like we have a manager's network that we would absolutely, if somebody went to their manager with an idea that was agency related, they would probably have a conversation across the entire network because it would make sense to bring other voices and other areas of expertise into the conversation. So just being aware of that. But I always, in a typical organization, go to your supervisor with that same information. Is it going to take a little longer? Yes. Do you need to be patient? Absolutely. Are you going to get what you want after the first conversation? Probably not. So prepare yourself to know that there are stages to getting what you need. I'm not talking about a crisis situation. Okay. I'm talking about implementing a new product, asking for a new service, creating PD for your employees, right? Those kinds of things aren't necessarily the crisis that we like to believe or the urgency that we like to believe they are. So I think that's an important part of communicating also is just being aware of the world around you and the things happening within your agency at the time that you're talking to your manager about it.
Okay. Yeah, the sort of the origin of my question comes from a real world example that probably well people of a certain age probably will understand. And by the way, your example of like if this was if today was the first time I told my husband that my parents were coming for 3 weeks, that is the most that it's resonated with. Makes you would never live that down. Why would you do that in your professional life either then? It's actually that's a really good example to kind of be able to look at it through like a lens that maybe we're more familiar with or that we just inherently understand better. So sort of along the same lines, the game of telephone that
Yes.
we played when we were younger. I don't know, kids are probably too buried in their phones now to play that game anymore at birthday parties, but we did at birthday parties when we were kids, as you whisper in someone's ear, the game of telephone, and your message as it passes along becomes diluted or probably completely inaccurate. It comes out completely wrong by the
Mhm.
end. And that happens in real life in business too. And we see that selling software to people is we have our our main contact there, our advocate who tests the software, understands the software, loves the software, and but then they have to go convince somebody else to love it as much as they do and that it's worth the investment. Um, that person often struggles taking all of like what they inherently understand at this point and communicating it up and then getting that person to communicate it up again. Like something that we do. Well, first of all, we ask them, how do we help you communicate this up the chain? Like, is there something, do you need help with that? Do you want with help with that? Because we can create some slides for you. We can create an executive summary report for you. We can do that. We have that built into our software, even. Like we can give you these assets to help you do that effectively. And that's something they could pass up the chain as well. are there any other like techniques that you would think of that would like, could it be, I don't know, would you invite some of those people to a lower level meeting or like, how do you ensure that the consistency of that message?
It again depends on the personalities in the organization and the culture of the organization. But if you're really excited about a piece of software and you want other people to see how it works, scheduling a demo is never a bad thing. And anybody who's interested and has time is great. And if you need to include your superintendent, ask that superintendent's executive assistant to find time on their calendar for you to show them what this is all about. Be prepared to share any potential risks, no matter how small, and how you can mitigate those risks when you're, especially with a new piece of software, right? It's never nothing. It never impacts nobody, right? So
Right.
you just have to be really clear about those things, but making the argument for it, having a conversation, saying, I'd really like to show you the software. This is how we can solve this problem. And then inviting them in, showing people what you know is always a good way to avoid that trickle down of incorrect information. And then the other thing I highly recommend, it's the hardest thing for people to do when they're communicating, is to say, I don't really know the answer to that. Let me go back to the rep and double check on that, and I will get back to you. And then do it in a timely manner so they can actually get the information that they need. I don't know is a fine and acceptable answer to a difficult question if you really don't have all the answers, right? People are asking me about Lumu and about the software, and I have limited knowledge. I know from a communication standpoint what this is all about and what you do, and I've seen some demo, and I think it's really, really terrific. I'm a marketing and communications person. I am not a tech person. Somebody's asking me questions about it that has more technical expertise than I do. I'm like, I'm not your gal to answer this question. Let me get you in touch with somebody who has the answer to that question. And at the same time, I would recommend that you stay in the conversation. Listen to the answer that that other person gives you so you have the same information and you're sharing the same information. It's a way to keep things consistent.
I actually also love that answer because this is something we have to teach salespeople all the time is I don't know is a perfectly acceptable answer. And in fact, when you answer the question that way, and then you do as Corey suggested, like go get the answer and deliver it back in a
Mhm.
timely fashion, you are building credibility. You are saying like it's okay if you don't know the answer. And that actually builds influence. It doesn't cost you influence. So it might feel like that. Saying I don't know might feel like you're making yourself weaker in that position, but you are
Yeah.
definitely not. You are definitely not. You are establishing confidence and trust with that person.
Right. I don't know, and throwing up your hands is one thing. I don't know the answer to that question. Let me find that information for you. Builds trust and credibility every single time.
Right. So on the topic of trust and credibility, this is something I did want to talk to you about today, and I just saw something come through the chat from one of our audience members here on this topic too. Um, is something that's gone that I've noticed about K through 12 folks in particular is that you're a very chatty group. You like to communicate with each other, and it's actually the communication. I wouldn't call it gossip, but maybe. Um, but the communications are actually really structured. So we see a lot of times even that districts are all part like in schools, districts are roll up to an ESD or a RACA or a BOCES or whatever it's called in each state. But in my experience, the IT directors of the districts that roll up to each of those usually have a forum for communicating with each other, sharing experiences, whether it's a monthly meeting that they do, or monthly lunch and learns, or webinars, or email threads, or they attend the same events. This is a very communicative group of folks, in my experience, compared to other industries, which I guess it makes sense. Like if we're working in the private sector, organizations are competing with each other. They don't necessarily want to share information, but K through 12 in my 3 years only working in the space, I've seen it's really collaborative and people are sharing ideas and experiences all the time. That's actually been really effective for Lumu. That's worked out in our favor as we've been focused on this space as our happy customers are talking a lot about our software with other folks they know, and we're finding a lot of new customers that way. So much so that we're actually, sharing a little bit of our secret sauce with you is we ask our happy customers, would it be okay to use your name and to use your organization's name when we're talking to other organizations like in your neighborhood, right? And maybe like in your county or your area of the state. Would it be okay to drop your name and say, you're so and so from this organization is using our product. They'd be happy to be for a reference for us. And um, when we're doing that, we're doing it locally, and we're using the names and the organization names of people that they know, and that carries a lot of weight when they hear, so okay, I know that person and I respect that person. If they're looking at this or they're using it already, maybe I will I'll do a demo. I'll like to see a demo of the product, and that has carried a lot of weight with us or with our customers and has helped us get the word out. Um, Is that something IT directors could do, say, for a cybersecurity project? They're trying to get buy-in for a new idea. They want their organization to look at this new piece of software. Um, is
Mhm.
references is references a good way to do that? And what is so powerful about a reference that makes that an effective strategy?
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit when we were chatting earlier, and I just pulled some statistics. McKinsey estimated word of mouth is the primary factor behind 20 to 50% of purchasing decisions. And it's the influence is very strong when somebody is buying something for the first time, or if the decision is consequential, real, if it feels very consequential, which in cyber it definitely does. Nielsen says 88% of consumers globally say they trust recommendations from people they know more than any other marketing channel. So even as an IT director, right, you don't consider yourself somebody who's in sales, but if you are asking for something and you need money for that something, you are now in sales. So you need to understand what it means to sell a product or a service that you feel is crucial for your organization. Now, when you're dealing with other districts and managing that word of mouth aspect of the conversation, I always say to use those testimonials as evidence and avoid using them as pressure. I find that when you're asking people to make decisions from a space of fear or a space where they feel that they're being held up against a wall, those are not happy decisions. And very often you will not get the result that you want, even if you're given budget approval. Something is not going to work the way you want it to work. So if you really want people's buy-in, getting those names, working with other districts as evidence and having them help you tell that story as evidence can really help you make your case. So that would really be my word of mouth recommendation. Just knowing it is powerful, Jarrett. You're absolutely right. And you have to use it because, like you said, K-12, we know each other, right? And within the states, I'm shocked. I came from outside of K-12 and I'm at WSIPC for about a year. Everybody knows everybody. They all have been working in different areas of the ecosystem. They know how this stuff works and they know who to talk to. So using those relationships impactfully can really help you get the help that you need when you need it.
Okay. So something that I've already also noticed about these references is that they're really easy to execute. Also, you're not trying to pass up a lot of data or information or result. You're just saying this is a person we know at an organization we know that's doing this. They're getting results. If we know those are smart people, if they're doing it, we should look at this too. And that is something that we've seen that's easy to pass up the chain without the message becoming diluted um, or being lost along the way because everyone knows it's very memorable and it's
Yeah,
very easy to process. I'm going to share something from the chat here. We've got some really good comments coming in
great.
about this topic. This is actually from one of our customers, a CTO here in Chicago. Um, it says so on this topic of that we're talking about right now. It says Jarrett, you always have to start with how this is impacting other school districts. When a software stops issues that are causing issues in other districts, that gets the attention of stakeholders. Let them be part of the decision on the buy and understand the risk. And then he adds, as a CTO, think of all the layers of communication. In a school district, this includes leadership, teachers, leaders, support staff, leaders, etc. Let them know in advance to get all their questions asked and answered so there's no surprises with a change. So, like phishing testing, MFA changes, cyber testing, let them know their voice and feedback is appreciated. That's really
Agreed.
great feedback. Thank you. Thank you, Mike.
Yes, thank you so much. I think that you just summed it up beautifully. Your voice and feedback are appreciated is a very powerful way to have that kind of a conversation. And you're absolutely right. Bringing in the stories of other school districts as evidence is really helpful. Information overload generally doesn't work. You can share information about a product, right? You'll give your bullet list as simple as you think you've made it. Simplify it more for the rest of us. It's never easy enough to understand. And throwing too many statistics is a bit of an overload. So I would just recommend chunking that situation, chunking the information, making it really easy to understand, and addressing the risks. And again, offering the ability to share their feedback is really helpful.
There's a really cool second comment here from somebody else because the person who just chimed in, the CTO of a of a school with a lot of resources, and so there's a lot of there's a lot of layers of management and approvals they have to go through. It's a a very sophisticated school, one of the larger schools in the state of Illinois. We have a different perspective here from a smaller school of someone's training that I think is really worth adding to sort of show the different realities that are out there. We have someone chime in. We tend to be smaller departments, so we rely on each other, districts, to help fill the gaps. And because we're smaller, we're always quite busy and don't have enough time to go through extensive vetting processes. So if another district has been through it already, we'll rely on their opinion. So that's a full-blown example of buying off a reference and the experience of somebody else. So just supports what you said. This is a really powerful
Absolutely. Word of
product.
mouth. That's the best advertising there is.
Okay. We have just a few minutes left. There's a bunch more questions here. Let me see if I can pick a few of these out or just go. So how far in advance of budget deadlines should an I team start shifting left? They're using your lingo, shifting left and talking to management about a new purchase.
I think you need to start that conversation earlier than you think. You want to make sure that you're starting that conversation where there's room to set expectations, to really understand priorities and things like that, right? So, a new purchase, the conversation can't start at the, hi, I need money, right? It has to start long before then. So, what you're doing is starting that conversation with the issue. Another thing to do is to understand when you're going into those conversations, if it's something that you need budget for, know your fiscal cycle, understand the budget cycle, understand when decisions are made about the fiscal year so you can have the conversation in a way that actually benefits everybody. So you might walk into a conversation thinking, "Oh man, we need this right now." But they don't, there's budgets are what they are, and you may not be able to get approval for it in the middle of a fiscal year. But you can have the conversation in the middle of a fiscal year and say, when can I get this on the agenda to talk about having this approved for the next fiscal year? So earlier than you would generally feel comfortable, because you might not want to ask for money before it's time to ask for money. But I would go into it by sharing the situation, talking about it, explaining that there is a cost to it and that you'd love to be able to share some of that information and understand how to get it on the docket for when the next budget cycle is discussed. Sometimes it really is that simple, especially in K-12.
Okay. We're going to take one more. I'm going to have time for one more question. And this one, it's almost adjacent to what you were just talking about there, but this is a question you and I have not talked about. I have not asked you this, and it's really interesting, and it's something I would want to know. So this is so somebody's example. We were turned down for something we wanted to get into our upcoming budget cycle. We still want it, even if we have to wait another year. How do we reapproach this topic?
How do I? Um, Okay, so when you ask your kid to do, I'm trying to make this personal, right? So you're going to ask your teenager to do something and they don't do it. And the next time you ask them, you just ask them the same thing, but you ask louder. Like, are they going to do it? Right? Probably not. I mean, they're teenagers, probably not going to do it anyway. But I wouldn't go back. The thing I wouldn't do if you've been rejected for one budget cycle, but you're willing to wait another year, is go back and ask for the same thing and ask for it louder, right? There's something that was missing there, unless it was just not this fiscal year, resubmit it the way it is. That's one thing. But if they're saying no and you want to try again, you need to figure out where the communication gap was. What was it about the conversation you had with the decision maker that left them without a clear understanding of how important the uh, the change is to make, or the technology, the piece of technology that you want to share is to implement. And you can ask them transparently what that is. You don't have to go back in and like circumvent the no. You go back in and say, I came to you with this product service idea, right? And we talked about how much it cost, and you were not comfortable with it in that fiscal cycle. I want to and set up time to talk to them about it. This is not a water cooler conversation. This is respecting a calendar and getting yourself on the calendar to talk to that person. And it should be the person that came to you with the no, not circumventing that person either. You just take a look and say, great, what was making you uncomfortable in this situation? Or why weren't we able to get to yes? And what do you need in order for us to get to yes, right? When you're proposing something, a purchase request is asking for money. It may not be communicating value. So you also may think about what you pitched the last time and say, well, did I communicate what I'm saving them, or did I just communicate what it's costing them? That's also a conversation that tends to go a little bit better, right? And I'm not talking about looking for things that aren't real, but you do want to have people really understand the value of something that you are investing in, not just what it's costing your company.
So have an open conversation with what is you said no, like what matters? Like how do we get to yes next time? Like what can I do differently? Something like that, like having that honest approach with that, something like that. It makes sense. And here
Yeah, I'm a big
I'm
fan
calling
of
this
transparency.
transparency. I'm calling it tricks. I'm a bad influence on this group. But
It's
these can be trick. It doesn't have to be tricks. Just be honest and be upfront about what you're trying to do and why you think it's valuable, and they'll help you probably get to where. Because I'm thinking about this. We ask our customers all the time, "What else do you need? Like, what do you need to know about our software for you to say yes?"
right.
I do that
Or
when I'm selling, but I don't do that when I'm asking my CEO for stuff.
Right. Or what is it that's holding you back from making a change in this area, right? So in your case, you're promoting a cybersecurity solution, right? So if they're saying no, and it was a no, not a, it's not right now, and not, well, do it next year or whatever, it was just, no, can't do it, then I think it's worthwhile to ask, well, this particular solution, you're not talking about the thing. You're not talking about the software. You're talking about what the value of the product does. Like, what is the need? What other districts might be using it already? That kind of thing. Just say, what was it about the investment in this cybersecurity solution that gave you pause? I'd love to know so I can explain it, or maybe you'll learn something about other areas that you need to develop, and you can go back to the person who has the product that you thought would work and explain to them why the entirety of the solution might not be quite right yet, or something that somebody doesn't understand. You were explaining to me the software that Lumu has available can connect to so many different systems. My gut might say, what do you mean it's going to be part of a Chromebook in somebody's classroom? Like, I just don't get that. And it made me uncomfortable. And it was an immediate, absolutely no way. So it could be that was it. And it just got them to a place where they didn't trust the change. They didn't trust the solution. So just trying to figure out what that is a really, really helpful way to go. And I always recommend that you make time, like calendar out a meeting for just an informal conversation. We're all remote now. You're not going to be just running into people in the hallway or stopping into their office. It's unusual to do that these days.
Corey, we could go on forever because we have this is talked to you many times about this, and I'm still learning. And there's a lot of great content here. Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you, WSIPC, for collaborating with us on this. Really excited about it, and I hope everybody got a lot out of this today. I'm sure you did because I got a lot out of it, and I've been talking to Corey for a few months now. So thank you, everybody, and thank you to our audience. You guys really added a lot today. I appreciate that too.
Yep.
All right, take care, everybody. We're here. If you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.